From the very beginning, this church has been incredibly supportive of mission efforts, whether it's in Clendenin or in Honduras or wherever it may be. And on behalf of the team, I just want to say thank you to this church as far as the encouragement, the prayers, the financial support. This has been tremendous. And we just thank you for giving us the opportunity to do this and to be your hands and feet, at this time in Roatan, Honduras. We're going to have several speakers this morning. They're going to share about their experiences on the island. We've got Christian Taylor, Kelly Gruser, Hannah Ross, Susan Swanson, and Claudia Berlin.
Good morning. Before I begin, I want to start with a short Bible verse pertaining to our trip. It's Mark 16:15, and it reads, "And he said to them, go into all the world and proclaim the gospel to the whole creation." My experience in Roatan was incredibly humbling and life-changing. While we were there, I worked in Hotting Sparrow. The group you saw there with Phil, that's me right there, with Zach and Vicky, working at Hotting Sparrow. We built the playground. I met some amazing people in that community. Most of the people that lived there, not all, but most, were in the same family. They were all related. And even though the people there, they have so little, they really definitely do not have very much. They remain with the most joyful souls. They are some of the most happy people, most content people that I've ever met, and it's incredibly eye-opening. It's amazing that like I can be here and have so much and still be uncontent with what I have, and the people there with so much lesser, they are so much happier and they find so much joy in the little that they have. They've left a long-lasting impression on me. I still talk to two of them all the time. Vicky right there, the one to my left, well, my right, and her sister Deborah. I message them all the time. I talk to them. They ask me questions about the U.S. I ask them questions about Roatan, what their life is like and stuff, and it's a lot of fun finding out stuff about them. Very interesting people. This whole trip was extremely eye-opening. I saw some incredibly devastating circumstances on the island that showed me how thankful I should be and how blessed I am to live here and be in this church, being involved here, and just all the things that I have that I take for granted all the time. Simple things like being able to just flush a toilet with the press of a button and having a sink to wash my hands in my bathroom to keep me healthy. It revealed things to me that I never really understood. People would tell me like, oh, over here, people, they don't have this and they don't have that. And I'm like, yeah, I get that, but I never really understood that until I went there and I saw that like firsthand, and I was right there with it. And it's just incredibly like, wow, like this isn't, people aren't just saying that, like that's really happening somewhere right now all the time. And I'd like to say thank you to Phil Manila for putting together everything, because I mean, we definitely would not have been able to do that at all without Phil. So can we like clap one time, a few times for Phil? And I also want to thank Richard and Bill and Jeff and Tori and Shayna and all you guys here at the church and everybody that made it possible for me to be a part of this team. Being only 14, it's been a real blessing to be involved, and I'm super excited for next year. So yeah.
Now it's on. Okay. So the first thing I want to start out with is, okay, so I was probably the most scared person to go on this trip because I had never been on a plane before, and going out of the country and being on the plane is just really scary. I actually had like a meltdown before, like the night before. So I was really scared, but as soon as I got like off the plane and stepped foot into Roatan, Honduras, it just felt so homey. Like everybody there is so welcoming and they're so loving, and it's just insane. Okay, so the first day that we started working, I was in a clinic, like Clinic Esperanza, with Hannah, Rachel, and a couple other people, and we actually, like, I don't know, God works in amazing ways. Like, we were so hungry, but we had to stay over for like an hour and a half. But being there, we got to spend more time with this kid named Gabriel and our translator named John. And we just made a lot of good friendships from that. And it was just amazing. And I got to meet this girl named Danya, and she was definitely the most joyful girl that I got to meet there. And it's just amazing to me how the people there have so little, and you're going to hear that a lot from like everybody, because it is just so eye-opening about how the kids are so much more joyful than anybody that I know here, and they have so much less. And actually, when we were walking down the street, there were like shoes, and they were made out of cardboard and string, and that was so like convicting, because before I went on the trip, I had bought $100 shoes, Chacos, and seeing that, just like I felt so guilty, because I wasn't like, I was grateful because my mom, like, she bought that for me, and I was grateful for it, but I wasn't like truly like grateful, and I wasn't thinking about it. And then seeing that just was so eye-opening, and I was like, oh my gosh. And then so the most that I got out of this trip was just to be more grateful, because the people there were so happy, and they just didn't have like a lot, like they really didn't. If you were there and you got to see it, like, it's heartbreaking, because it's just so heartbreaking, because the people deserve so much more than they have, but they can't like afford it, and it's just so, it's so sad. But I just want to thank all of you guys, because without you, I definitely would not have been able to go to the trip, because it's like expensive, and you guys donated, and then all of your prayers just help so much. So thank you.
Took a lot of skill right there. Okay, so this was my second year in Roatan, and what's really stuck with me is that every single day that I've been back, like, I've wished and I have wanted so bad to be back there. I remember Thursday night dinner, I couldn't get through my dinner because I was crying so much, because I didn't want to leave these wonderful people. And so whether we were meeting sick kids at the local clinic or going to a community to do a VBS for 40 kids, which, by the way, was crazy. Like, it was so fun. They had my volleyball. My volleyball was black by the time we left there with dirt. But these kids were so excited to see us. It was like an immediate click. Like, we got out of the van, and they were like, yay, gringos, and that's foreigners in Spanish. So we got called that a lot while we were there. I just want to be back in that atmosphere of love and kindness, and that kind of joy and that kind of love that you experience while you're there. It's something that it stays with you for the rest of your life. And I know they've talked about this too, but like, seeing all the brokenness side by side with all the joy is something that you can't get out of your mind. And it's like infectious joy. Like, if you're around them, you're happy too. And it's not happiness. Happiness is fleeting, but this is the joy that stays with you, and it's in your heart. It's the joy that comes from Jesus. And so, it's just the people live in worse conditions than most of us, but they are more content. I remember coming back here the Sunday after we got back and being in this huge building. Like I take this building for granted. We took a walk up to the top of the Colonia to go to the church that some of the team helped to build last year, and it was a concrete rectangle probably the size of this stage. And it was flooded with water, and the kids saw that we were coming to do VBS, and they got their brooms out, and they swept the water out for us. They were so excited. But I take this building for granted, and I take the air conditioning in my house for granted. And so it just really sticks with you, and it convicts you. It's just, wow. And so I know that God has a plan for me with this place, that he has brought me to this island for a reason. Like, the relationships that we have built there last year and this year, I want to talk about someone that we met. It's not on there, but someone that we met on Sunday at the church that we went to. Her name was Brenda, and she's a community health care worker, and her daughter is Lexa. She's 17, and I had never met someone my age on the island yet, so I was really excited. They didn't speak any English, but I was trying so hard to start a conversation, talk to them, and Richard talked to them, and we did an impromptu VBS for them on Thursday. church I was talking about. And so I got to talk to Brenda. She knew no English. I know barely any Spanish. And so by the power of God, this was complete Holy Spirit. This was not me. I got to have a conversation with her, a full conversation. There was no hesitation. We knew what we were talking about. And she told me about her daughter, Lixa, and how she has to go to the mainland to get surgery on her hands because she has really bad arthritis. And that relationship that I've built, she asked me to go to her house on Thursday, but I couldn't because we had to do a VBS, and we had other priorities that we had set up. But I'm so excited. I was like, remember me next year because I will be back to talk to you. We've had this relationship. I'm so excited. And also the people that housed us, they were so hospitable. It was Carlos, Chris, and Carlos Jr. The guys, I know they immediately clicked with Carlos Jr. They were out looking for crabs like every day in the ocean, and Carlos knew all these coral reefs and took them too. And they also had two little girls. I forget their names, but they were attached to my hip the whole time there. And I remember the last day I was going to pack, and they were like, "Can we help you?" And sure. So they were like, "Does this go here? Does this go here?" And I'm like, see. And so that was really fun. And then they watched me put on my makeup, and they were like right here in my face. They were so excited. So, I mean, those relationships, and also the relationships with the team, like seeing this younger generation and being with the older generation, like I can go joke around with Phil and like have a good old time. I have this relationship with Claudia now. Like, it's exciting. It's what we need to do here. We need to have relationships within the church that we can build on. And so I am just so excited for this church's future with Roatan, and for my future with Roatan. Like I said, I know God has brought me here for a reason, and I plan on going as much as I can. So I just want to thank you guys again for all the support that you've given, and I just know that God is going to do great things through us in Roatan.
So this trip, wow. It's really cool to be part of the older generation. You know, I don't know when that happened. I ended up evolving into the older generation, and I think when you're experiencing things when you're younger, you don't even have any clue how beautiful it is to look at it from the older generation and see it being imparted. We were teenager heavy, and it was amazing. These teenagers are God's servants, and it was... What I'd like to speak about is I watched Discipleship 101 class, and not one single rule book or guideline was there. It was all, I remember years ago I did a Bible study at my old church, and it was called I'd Rather See a Sermon. I don't know if you guys have ever read that study, but it was a book, and I saw a sermon. The leaders that were on this trip, before this trip happened, I watched these beautiful people prepare a way. They went out and they set up a plan. They set up a plan with the Lord's wisdom and counsel. They set up a plan. And then we got there, and this is the first morning we woke up on the island. I had it was almost like God taught me in object lessons on this trip. You know how God will sometimes give you an object lesson, you're like, I see it. It's really cool. So I woke up really early, as I always do. It was about 5 a.m. And I'm sitting out on the upper deck of this beautiful home we were staying in. And I watched as Phil and our beautiful preacher, Jeff, who I've always loved, but I know his heart now, and it's just all Jesus. Anyway, I watched them go out with the owner of the home, and they were like packing the boat, and they were preparing to go out fishing at 5 in the morning. And I watched as they do this, and it was like the Lord spoke to me in my heart and said, this is what disciples do. You go and you you learn and you grow, and that's what they did. They went out and they ended up catching a barracuda, which is a scary fish if you guys have never seen or experienced a barracuda. I didn't have to handle it. I watched them take pictures with it after I got to see it all, and we ended up eating it that night, and they didn't even get to enjoy the fruit from their labors, but we did, and it was really good. And so we all watched. It wasn't just Susan Swanson watching. It was all these guys. It was all these teenagers. It was all of these grown-ups, and we all watched. And then it would go a step further. Okay, you saw me. Watch me. Now I'm going to teach you. And then we had several situations for us that are in the older generation. Watching Claudia learn from Phil. Let me tell you, Phil is a master with like all things carpentry. And he taught her how to appropriately use the circular saw. And then he said, watch me. Then he said, you do it. And there was this another object lesson where the board kind of didn't break the right way. And she was like, oh, I cut it too short, or I don't remember how it worked. And she was like, maybe you better do the rest of them. And he was like, I need like 9 boards that are 90 inches long. And there she was over there with her circular saw, sweating. It was like 100 degrees. And all of these teenagers had the same exact experience that we did. Like, our preacher turned into a fisherman, and he also turned into a master carpenter. You know how you hear the phrase, do unto others as you wish them to do unto you? Our preacher does unto others, like if he would expect him to dig a hole that was 2 foot deep, our preacher digs a hole that's 10 foot deep. He works that hard. And the boys would not even be tired. He'd be like, I better take a turn. I don't want you to hurt yourself. And it was the most beautiful object lesson of discipleship I've ever seen. And so we saw a sermon in each other. We saw a sermon in the older generation. These kids, they were powerful soldiers for the Lord. It was just amazing. The most touching experience that I had on the island that I would be amiss in not sharing with you. It still softens my heart. I have the privilege of being around a lot of these guys, a lot of these teenagers. So I know them, the good, bad, and the ugly, and they know me as well, the good, bad, and the ugly. There was a situation where one of our youth, his name's Austin, he's not here today, he got really sick. Like, it seemed like it happened quickly. He was having symptoms that looked very similar to malaria. Yes, we all took the anti-malarials and all that good stuff, but we hadn't been on the island long enough, thank you, Jesus. But the symptoms were the same. Or there was a possibility it could be Zika, and we all know that that's scary, and we don't know a whole lot about it, but, they were testing him for all kinds of stuff. So he was that sick. He had a fever, he was sweating, he was cold, he was shaking, he was laying on and in this clinic that he was receiving services, as you can imagine, yes, it had running water, which was a blessing because the hospital there doesn't, is my understanding. I may be wrong, but it doesn't. But the clinic does. The rooms are very small, and he was laying on one cot. And then to the other side of him, there was a young lady that was in her mid-20s, and she and her husband were there, and she was with child, and she was very sick and had to receive IV fluids. And so, she's receiving fluid, she's sick, she's shaking, she was really, really cold, her feet were shaking, and she was there in sandals, the same as I'm wearing sandals. And I'm going to tell you, I've had 6 years of Spanish, and I was so rusty. Almost everybody spoke Spanish on the island, and almost exclusively. And this young lady was the same. She spoke Spanish. Austin, out of our whole team, he's probably, and I'm not trying to be demeaning, he's the least likely to know Spanish, guys. It's important to know this. He's not real well-versed in Spanish. None of us really were. He, in Spanish, because I do know Spanish, he said to the young lady, I was sitting outside the room, there wasn't enough room for me to be in there. He said to her, in Spanish, are your feet cold? And I'm like, what is he talking about? Because he went from shaking, laying on a table, face down, sick as a dog. And she said, see. I know that to be yes. And I kind of peered around the corner. It was one of those, like, I had to check it out. I didn't know what was going on. And my Austin, and I consider him mine because he's in my car more than he's in his parents' house. He's big guy, he's almost 6 foot tall, maybe 6 foot now. He takes off his big black Nike socks that are, 12-inch, he's got a big old foot, and he puts them on her fragile little feet. And he said, you want my socks? And she said, see. And Mama Hen is standing outside the door, and I'm just bawling. And I was able to, very quietly, without a flash, take a picture of those socks, and I didn't bring it today. But it is on my Facebook page, and I encourage you all to see it if you're friends with me, and if not, try to be friends with me so you can see it. It's such a blessing. But anyway, I saw these kids turn into disciples, and they always have been, but to a different level that you can't explain. And you can't create that in just any environment. And, I'm eternally grateful to everybody in here. If you said one prayer, if you gave 1 penny of your money, if you did anything, if you bought a shirt, you have no idea the eternal impact these kids and these adults had on Roatan and how much of an impact it had on us. And I'm just so grateful, and thank you. God bless.
So I told Susan in the 8:30 service, I said, wow, you're a hard act to follow, and she still is, but you've got me now. But, something that Hannah said earlier, she was talking about building relationships, and I was thinking about that. We built relationships with the people there, and it was so important, and we loved them so much, and they were so eager to be our friend. They were so eager to hug us, to love on us, and like Hannah said, it broke her heart to leave them. I mean, all these kids were wonderful, but I think there's just something special there with Hannah. She loves that place. But I just wanted to mention that the people that we stayed with, Carlos Sr., Carlos Jr., who are the same age as these kids here, they just had such a wonderful rapport. We just all kind of fell in love with each other. And then Carlos has a son, Chris, who's probably around 30, that is in charge of cooking. And Larita, I believe was her name, she did the cooking for us, and she was wonderful. So one day Chris came to us, and he said to Susan and I, he said, hey, you're from West Virginia? And we said, yeah. He said, I bet you all can do biscuits and gravy, right? And we said, Susan said, well, I do really good gravy. And I said, well, I can do biscuits. He goes, oh, wow, would you all do that one morning for us? So we did, and sausage, and that was just another way of just building relationships. So we love those people, and we've invited them to come up here, and they've promised us that they will. So we hope to see them in the fall. They were great people. So I worked with Hannah and Kaylee and Rachel there at the clinic for the first 3 days, and it was awesome. And it may sound weird to think we were at a clinic, but Miss Peggy, who is an American that is friends with Richard, she said this is a really good place to maybe do VBS because the parents come and they bring their children, and if they have a sick child or maybe a well visit, then they have all the rest of their children there with them too, and they're waiting under this kind of like a carport area. So we did VBS, we did crafts, and that's where we met that little Dania that we loved so much. She was just uber joyful, and that's when we came back in the evenings, and Bill would ask us, "Where did you see God today?" And all the young kids and all of us, we said, wow, we saw it in this face and this face and this face. And then on Thursday and Friday, I said, I'd like to kind of go out there and get down and dirty, and build stuff. So I went out to Hottie and Sparrow where they were building with Phil and Jeff. And it was great because there's where I really fell in love with the people. I got to know little Ronnie, he was 18 months old. Michael, who is 6 years old, and then my amigo Alberto, he was in 5th grade. But we got to know them and play with them, and you know, they had, and like everyone said, they had absolutely nothing. Little Ronnie, both days I was there, and I think all week, he pushed around a baby stroller that probably was his, and that was his toy, you know. Or else he sat on top of a 5-gallon empty plastic blue gas container, and he bounced on it. That was what they had to play with. They lived in what we would probably call a shack, with boards all nailed in different directions. There was one bicycle in the area that was shared maybe among 15 kids. They had an outdoor toilet in this community that had a tarp over it, and you had to take a bucket of water and go flush it. So like Christian said, you know, it is a blessing to see what we have, and to see that the joy that they have, and that joy is intrinsic. So as we were out there building, the little boys, they all wanted to come and help us. We had this huge beam that we put the bolts for the swings in, and you know, we were drilling holes in it, and we had this big thing reaming out the holes. And so the boys sat on the ends of it and got to feel that vibration, and got, you know, just got a kick out of that. They love that. So we had to cut the bolts off because they were too long. And later, Susan said, "Look at those kids over there. They were playing with those bolts and tapping out beats, you know." So I acted like I was dancing with them and stuff. You know, they start laughing. But, you know, they make their toys out of whatever they have, you know, and that was just cool. So when we finally got the swings together, we started pushing them, and Alberto, who's the biggest kid, you know, I pushed him really high because there was a palm tree up there, and his feet could hit it. And he said something in Spanish, and he laughed, and I said, "What did he say?" And he said, "Oh, this feels so good." And I thought, yeah. You know, it feels good to me too, you know, to be a part of that and to be a part of those kids' life. So then one little side note that was kind of funny, I'd asked someone how to say bird, and I thought they said parrot. So I was like, "Yeah, you're flying like a parrot." I was doing that for like 2 days, and finally some little girl that lived there, she said, "You're telling him he's flying like a dog." I'm like, "I'm sorry, I thought you said it was parrot." And she says it with an accent, and I said, "Well, that's my West Virginia accent. I'm sorry." They didn't care. You know, they were just happy. So would I go again? Absolutely. Loved it, loved it, loved it. Loved the people we met. Think about them often. I had a special little place for Alberto. I don't know why. You know, some kids just tug at your heart. He's my amigo. He's my buddy. Susan and I got to walk over to the little school, and they had a little fair going on one day, sort of like their first President's Day. So we bought them a couple of things, and they thought it was a big deal that Susan left, I think, maybe $2 or $4 for the contribution to the school. But they never begged for anything. They never asked for anything. But the only thing they wanted to do was be your friend. And we loved it. It was amazing. So thank you guys once again for everything that you did to help us out.
Just a couple more thank yous as we begin to wind up here. First of all, we'd like to thank Richard for organizing this trip. He was the driving force. He spent countless hours putting this. So Ryan, tell him you got an applause even though he couldn't be here today, okay? The driving force, the organizer, the brains behind the operation. He was a tremendous coach. As you've heard, we had a tremendous amount of diversity on this trip. We had people ranging from 14 to 60. I'm in the 60 range. We had people, as far as experience was concerned, that ranged all the way from Richard, who grew up in a missionary family in a foreign country, to those who had never been on a missionary trip before, never been out of the country or on an airplane before, right? So we had a tremendous diversity within this group in experience and background. Another thing that could be seen as a challenge is when you're on a mission trip in a third world country, things don't happen quite as planned. And Marianne, you've been there before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There was a lumber yard on this island where Phil and Richard could go and order supplies, so we'd have things for the construction project. The difference between here and there is when you order something, three things need to happen. One is it needs to be delivered where it's supposed to go, and number two is it's supposed to be what you ordered, and it's supposed to be, thirdly, when it's supposed to get there. In a third world country, number one happens pretty well. They're going to get it where it needs to be. It may not be when you wanted it or what you ordered, but it's going to get there. And Phil, you navigated all that with very skillful and patient hands, and so we appreciate that. I'd also like to thank Gary and Helen They were great servants. They provided transportation for all 19 of us to and from the Charleston airport, and that involved some very early morning and some very late night hours, so we thank you for that. Let's step back for just a second and think about what we heard today. You have a very diverse team, including some very inexperienced people, being dropped into a third world country with a lot of variability, no one really knowing exactly what we're getting into, and a lot of change happening. God took that and made a wonderful, can't look at these guys, made a wonderful trip out of this. He accomplished great things. This place doesn't have the type of social service safety nets that we're used to. There is no Medicaid plan. There are no food stamps. There are no social service agencies. Couldn't believe there's no Huntington Area Food Bank down there. What you have is what you have, except what is delivered by the grace of God through the hands and feet that you supported. And so we thank you for that again. If I had to summarize the trip in one sentence, I would say this. The poor were served, the word was taught, and God's servants grew by giving. In short, this trip is what the church is to be everywhere, every day. The other thing that the church does is pray together. And we are now going to have our family prayer time. If you have something on your heart you need to pray with us about, if you have a praise you want to offer up, this is our time to do that. We'll have some people coming forward to receive you. So let's stand and sing.